From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Almost 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump shocked the political world and did what few expected. He bested Hillary Clinton in the Electoral College to capture the presidency. Here in Montana, Governor Bullock held back a solid challenge of his own from businessman and entrepreneur Greg Gianforte. But the Democrats lost every other statewide office on the ballot and missed a chance to make gains in the state legislature. This morning on Face the State, Chief Political Reporter Mike Dennison and I are joined by two guests to help us understand why election night unfolded the way it did and what the elections mean for the 2017 legislative session and beyond. Tim Warner is a Democratic consultant, and Glenn Oppel is Vice President of Government Affairs at for Montana Affairs at Strategies 360, a public affairs and consulting firm based in Montana and throughout the American West. Gentlemen, thanks for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, Mike,
Yes.
election night, you were hanging out with Steve Bullock. When did they start to get excited? When did they think that they had this thing in the bag?
Well, I don't know if they ever were really excited. I was also there with some other Democratic candidates who were watching the returns, and Bullock went in pretty confident, and about midnight when they left, they were up several thousand votes, but then things started getting tight. I think they were kind of waiting to see how big a lead they had to pile up, because they knew they had to pile something up. But all these rural counties coming in favor of Greg Gianforte. But I think they were pretty confident because a lot of the counties that still hadn't come in by 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning were Cascade, Glacier, Gallatin, Missoula, all Democratic places that Steve Bullock won.
Yeah, in fact, actually, Cascade had a problem counting ballots. I guess they weren't going through the machines. But yeah, right, I was there basically when we finished. I said, I thought that Gianforte might get the lead. He did. But sure enough, I believe when I went to bed that night that essentially Bullock was going to have it because exactly what you saw there.
Yeah.
So what happened? How did Steve Bullock pull this off?
I mean, I think that there's really a couple reasons. Number one, he's a very popular governor. I think when he was heading into his election, re-election for governor, he had a 66% approval rating. And I think the second factor, and probably the bigger factor, is the fact that he hasn't done anything bad. He hasn't done anything to really hurt Montana. And furthermore, kind of relatedly, we have a good economy in Montana. There's no economic crisis, which is usually what is the cause of an incumbent getting unseated is economic issues. The Gianforte campaign tried to make coal strip an issue, tried to make natural resource development an issue, and the coal strip situation, although pretty significant, is pretty isolated. And I don't think it had a play across the state as the Gianforte campaign wanted it to. So I think with those factors, Governor Bullock had a really good chance of coming back to the second floor of the Capitol building.
So Tim, how do you feel about what was effective that Bullock did to win this race? Because obviously he outperformed every other Democrat up and down the ballot. He beat Greg Gianforte, not resoundingly, but somewhat comfortably. What did he do that helped him win? Yeah.
Well, he won decisively. I think Governor Bullock ran a much better campaign. The Democratic Governors Association ran a much better campaign with the Good Jobs Montana coalition. The advertising was a major factor in this cycle. There were so many ads. People were, in some cases, very annoyed by them, but the volume of the ads was remarkable. And a historic number of ads purchased by Greg Gianforte, which is a little vexing because if he spent $5-6 million on so many ads, what was wrong with those ads? Maybe it's that he was fishing upstream when you're, maybe it's using a brand new shovel to clear a corral. The ads they're also lies. I mean, this ad where they superimpose Steve Bullock's face onto another person's body for no reasons. I think I've met Greg Gianforte. He wouldn't remember or know me, but I think he's incredibly intelligent. I think he got some either really bad advice from some people who were spending his money erroneously and ineffectively. And the contrast was the Democratic Governors Association and the Good Jobs Montana coalition. They were putting up ads that were very, very effective that were never responded to by the Gianforte campaign. Talking about Social Security, talking about sales tax. Those were decisive issues and things that became very, very difficult for Gianforte to overcome.
Glenn, you emphasize fundamentals. He's an incumbent. The
Yeah.
economy's pretty good. He's pretty popular. Tim's emphasizing campaign strategy and advertising. Well, what do you think about Tim's explanation? How much of this was actually advertising strategy versus fundamentals?
I really don't think the advertising mattered that much, frankly. I think Bullock had such a strong advantage coming into this race that I don't think the advertising was going to make a big impact on the base of either party.
So you would have advised Greg Gianforte to spend how much money on advertising? Less than $7 million? I mean, how could...
You know, it comes down to whether Gianforte's messaging was effective or not. I think he definitely picked some pretty good messages, 49th in per capita income.
False.
Let's notwithstanding whether it's true or not, let's just take a look at what the messaging was. He wanted to emphasize natural resource development and getting that back on track in Montana. Of course, some of that is due to economic forces. He wanted to try to use corruption as an issue, corruption in the Bullock administration as an issue. He was pushing for more high-tech jobs. Given the fact that we have a relatively good economy, and that's not so much that, it's just that we don't have any economic crises in Montana, I still thought Bullock had the momentum going into this race.
Yeah,
And
it's tough to beat an incumbent, but Greg Gianforte's final ad, his final case was, wait a second, I'm a Montanan. Really, I'm a Montanan. That was his final ad. That's where he
on
put
the
it.
defensive.
Yeah.
And I think from Bullock's messaging standpoint, if anything, it probably had an impact. I think it was the stream access issue and the public lands issue, and I think that's something that transcends party politics. I think that's something that all Montanans care about, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. We all want to be able to get on that stream and go fishing. We all want to be able to get into the woods and go hunting. It's not just a Democrat-Republican issue.
So maybe don't sue the state of Montana and then lie about it. It was a troubled campaign throughout, and I think that's one of the factors, to answer your question, that gave Bullock a leg up in the campaign.
Well, Rosebud County, for example, Greg Gianforte certainly improved there in Rosebud County and did a lot better. But if you look kind of from place to place to place, Rick Hill almost became governor. People forget how close that election was. That was really, how many votes do you remember, Mike? It was
maybe 10 or 12,000.
A few thousand, yeah.
It wasn't a lot of votes. So Rick Hill got 62.1% of the vote in rural counties. To do better is basically what Greg Gianforte had to do. He had to get a higher percentage coming out of those rural counties. Election night, he had 61.8% of the vote out of rural counties, less than Rick Hill got. He needed to push that number up. So why wasn't he effective in the rural areas?
Well, see, I think he was pretty effective in some rural areas, but you look at eastern Montana, for example, the oil patch, he pretty much killed Bullock in all those counties. But you look at the other counties, Bullock held his own. And central Montana, western Montana, and the rural counties, he did okay. As to why he did, I think for the same reasons that Glenn said and the same reason that Tim talked about. A better campaign, and he goes in there as an incumbent, hasn't really screwed anything up, so he did okay.
He did better, for example, in places around Leslie Robinson's area, right? So he did improve vote totals over Rick Hill in Phillips County, Fergus County, and all that stuff. But he still had to get another 4 or 5, squeeze another 4 or 5 points out of there, take away from Bullock. He didn't. And then to kind of put the icing on the cake for Bullock did better in the boot, right? He did better up in the Flathead. So, for example, he got 55% of the vote. Greg Gianforte did of the Flathead. Well, that was a worse performance than Rick Hill had gotten. Bullock improved his numbers in the Flathead. He improved his numbers in Lewis and Clark County. He improved his numbers in Gallatin by a significant amount. He got 8% higher, percentage points higher in Silver Bow. He got 5 percentage points higher in Gallatin County, the home county of Greg Gianforte. The only places where Steve Bullock and the boot didn't do better: Yellowstone, basically slightly better, it was basically flat. Cascade, a decline. And then over in Ravalli County, Bullock did better. He still lost it to Greg Gianforte, he did Flathead, but he did better. So why overall did we see basically the Gianforte campaign not make up the votes where they needed to make them up? You think it's public access. Is that the story?
I mean, I think it was an effective message. I think it's something that Montanans are going to resonate with that message. But I think it's absolutely imperative that a candidate like Gianforte pick up that rural vote and do very, very well, but also do well in leaning Republican areas like the Yellowstone and conservative areas like the Flathead. And if he wasn't doing as well there, it's not a surprise that he couldn't. I mean, the margin's so thin that you've got to do very, very well in those areas in order to come on top at the end of the day.
Well, I think one thing, though, that Tim said is true. That last ad that Gianforte had saying, hey, I am a Montanan, I think the outside, being seen as an outsider still hurt him in a lot of these areas. You know what you think? I mean,
when independent voters who were undecided were making their decisions in the marketplace, they were hearing that Greg Gianforte thinks that Noah was 600 years old and you shouldn't have a Social Security check, that he's pro-sales tax, and he's not a Montanan, and he sued the state on stream access. That was all in the marketplace. And the other stuff that was in the marketplace from the Gianforte side of things was all reaction to that, except for a couple of kind of inadequate allegations based upon hard to understand corruption arguments that obviously didn't punch through. Yeah. So persuadable voters in the polling that we were doing shifted really quick toward Bullock, and that was a pretty decisive factor in how the results ended up.
It's clear that Montanans will vote for a non-Montanan. Conrad Burns was not from Montana, but I think about Conrad Burns, and I think about Greg Gianforte, and I don't think they had a lot in common, in the sense that Conrad came off as a very good old boy, regular fella. Greg Gianforte never did, and on top of that, I don't think Greg Gianforte was terribly funny, and I think kind of being funny kind of helps, and certainly Steve Bullock is funny. I mean, that little viral video that was shot with John Tester going to Taco John's and getting a six-pack and a pound, I thought, in my view, kind of showed why those two guys are effective at what they do. So at the end of the day, I think there might have been some personality that wasn't conveyed effectively in the advertisement. So Greg Gianforte loses, Steve Bullock wins. We go to the next race, the House seat. Zinke improved on his numbers, basically did what Donald Trump did, and everyone was talking about Denise Juneau as being this pretty fabulous candidate, and yet Kim Gillen's done the best out of the Kim Gillen, Lewis,
when you say
Denise
everybody,
Juneau.
I don't know if everybody was talking about it. I mean, a lot of Democrats and liberals were thinking that she was a liberal champion and she was a good candidate. She raised a lot of money.
She did.
But I never really saw her as a terribly effective candidate. And think back when she ran as an incumbent 4 years earlier as the superintendent of public instruction. She barely beat someone who was no one really knew, Sandy Welch, just by a couple thousand votes. Mm-hmm. And then we had her on Face the State. I've seen her in debates, and I just thought that she was not a real forceful, effective candidate. I wonder, what did you guys think about as far as why she didn't do as well as people thought she might?
Well, I think that in that race, Montanans were asked, are you ready to make history? Are you ready to do something historic and really affect a big change that's going to be noted nationwide? And the answer was, yes, they are, but not in that direction. They were willing to vote for Trump, but they were not willing to vote for Denise Juneau in a decisive manner. And she raised the money, she did the work. I thought that she made a respectable effort, but I don't know.
But she didn't do much better than John Lewis, and everyone thought that she was a more dynamic candidate and campaigner than John Lewis. But same result.
I think there's a lot of unfortunate factors in Montana culture and Montana historically that we're not quite ready for a Denise Juneau.
Yeah. Glenn, could you have won that race if you had been the consultant to Denise Juneau? Could you have done something better?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think in a red state like Montana, Zinke's the perfect candidate. Military background, fairly conservative. He was just the perfect candidate for Montana. And I think probably any of the candidates in that ticket that got a boost from Trump, I think it was probably Zinke.
Well, and in fact, Zinke tied himself pretty darn closely to Donald Trump. Donald Trump outperformed Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney got 55% of the vote. Donald Trump got 56.5. That's about what Zinke got at the end of the night. But what struck me was fascinating. Silverbow. This is a county where Steve Bullock gets 70% of the vote. Denise Juneau, 59% of the vote of Silverbow. This is like Democrat Central, and she lost Lewis and Clark. She lost Cascade. In a lot of respects, for all the hype and the fact that she was outspending on TV toward the end, Ryan Zinke, she didn't put a dent in him.
Not really. I mean, you look up and down all the counties, as we have in terms of the numbers, and what you see is that Denise Juneau is not doing much better than Hillary Clinton in a lot of these counties. And Hillary Clinton's getting killed almost everywhere except maybe Missoula and Butte. And Juneau's maybe a few percentage points better than her.
Well, so for example, you've got numbers there in Bighorn County, right, Reservation County. What are the numbers?
Well, that's one of the counties that she won.
Yep.
48% for Hillary Clinton, 54% for Juneau, and 62% for Steve Bullock. Now, the Indian counties, I think those are kind of skewed because, she is Native American, so she did a little bit better there.
But she didn't match what Steve Bullock did, right?
No, she didn't, no. And well, let's look at Lewis and Clark, for example. Helena, where she lives, Steve Bullock lives, tons of government workers. Hillary Clinton does not win that county. 41% is all she gets. Denise Juneau, 44%, just beats her by 3 percentage points. And Bullock pulls in 60%. So I think that's kind of the story of the race as it played out across the state.
Tim, is Denise Juneau's run in Montana politics over? Does she have a shot to come back?
Oh, she's young, she's talented, smart, and I think there's definitely a role for her in Montana's future, maybe the nation's future.
Is this a time to speculate, given the performance of Ryan Zinke, improving on his election from 2 years ago? Is he going to run against Jon Tester, who's announced that he's going to be running for re-election in 2018? Glenn?
I mean, I think Ryan will give that serious consideration, but he's going to want to see what's going to happen over the next couple of years. He's going to want to see how the public reacts to Trump administration and Republican-led Congress.
Well, but he doesn't really have 2 years, though, do you? I mean,
well, right.
He's got to decide the next 6 months, pretty much, doesn't he?
Yeah, right. He's got to jump in pretty soon if he's going to do it. But I think it's speculation at this point to say that he's going to jump in and do that. But it wouldn't surprise me if he did.
Tim?
Well, I think everything that Jon Tester does, Ryan Zinke reacts and responds to. So if he hasn't decided that he's running for the Senate, he certainly has decided that he's going to act like he's running for the Senate. And if he does, I think it'll be a very interesting opportunity for Montanans to evaluate two very good public servants.
Mike, you've covered Denny Rehberg. You've covered Ryan Zinke. How would you compare the two of them as candidates or individuals or congresspeople?
Well, I haven't covered Zinke all that much, to be honest. I've covered Rehberg much more. I think Zinke, as a candidate, he's a little more likable than Dennis Rehberg. I mean, I like Dennis Rehberg. A lot of people don't like Dennis Rehberg. And Zinke, the people who don't like Zinke are mostly in his own party and who really don't like him. He's a good debater, a smart campaigner, a very personable guy. I think he'd be a very tough candidate against Jon Tester.
So if that House seat's open up, right, if he runs, right, for the Senate, you have an open House seat, does Greg Gianforte toss his hat in there? I mean, what do you think is going to happen there?
Again, I think it'd be speculative to say for sure whether Greg would jump into something like that at this point.
I would, honestly, he has such a good record of investing in companies and creating jobs in the private sector. I would hope that he uses resources for cool things like that in Montana as opposed to running and losing again and sending all the money to out-of-state political consultants. I think there's much more opportunity for what he's good at to continue in Montana.
Well, I'll tell you this. First of all, if you go back to 2012, the very first ads that were aired on radio were in March of 2011 in that race. So you can imagine that March of 2017, we might see our first ads in the Senate race popping up. So certainly I think Ryan Zinke needs to make a choice soon. And Rehberg made his announcement in February. But another interesting thing, before Reber got in, Daines announced right after the election that he was running for that Senate seat, and then of course he switched over to the House. So I actually think we'll know pretty soon what that kind of matchup looks like. John Tester's path forward, I think, has gotten better, oddly, with Donald Trump. Isn't that true? Glenn?
I don't know if I have any thoughts on that. I don't know about in Montana. If you can link Tester to the Obama administration, where I think a lot of the middle America angst is coming from, and where the support for Trump is coming from, you might. A strong Republican might be able to run a good campaign against Tester if you can link him to Obama.
Would you rather have Hillary Clinton at the top of the ticket?
If I'm John Tester, I would much rather have Donald Trump as president than Hillary Clinton. I'm looking solely at my reelection prospects. I think that the conventional wisdom is the party that's out of power does better in those congressional races from the presidency.
Well, we'll have some exciting times going on with that Tester potential Zinke race. But look at what happened after the governor's race and the House race. Democrats got destroyed. I mean, I think there's no other way of putting it, right? You look down ballot, every other statewide office, executive office, Democrats won, picked up. Lindeen lost to Corey Stapleton. And then you go over the legislature, no net change in the House when Democrats were widely expected to pick up seats. And then in the Senate, I think most insiders would argue that Democratic prospects were not very good, but they lost 3 seats. I don't think that was expected. Tim, what happened?
Well, I think Trump happened, and that was a very real dynamic. And the Democrats, for the most part, didn't run better campaigns. They ran worse campaigns. And that's going to have an effect on the results.
Yeah.
The white supremacist Republican up in the Flathead, he lost. The radical right-wing anti-public education candidate Billings is one, but also in Park County lost. So it was nice to see some of the extremes, frankly, on both sides, kind of weeded out. But I think it's gut check time at the Democratic Party.
Well, let me pose a question to Glenn this way. Is Montana becoming a Republican state? I don't think we're going to be like Wyoming or Idaho or North Dakota, but can the Democrats come back from this?
I mean, for the foreseeable future, I think the Republicans have got a real stronghold on the state. I think 2020 is going to be, the 2020 governor's race is going to be very interesting. I think the Republicans have some potential strong candidates there, whereas the Democrats, I mean, I can't
Where's
even
the
think
bench?
of a,
Yeah.
there is, right, exactly. I don't see much of a bench there for the Democrats. So, and the legislature, I just do not see the legislature changing much. By the next 2018 or 2020 cycle. You've got maybe 3 toss-up districts in the Senate. You have about maybe 8 in the House.
Mm-hmm.
There's a solid Republican control of both chambers of the legislature. And I think we're going to see that for the foreseeable future.
Right. Unless Democrats can win some rural seats, which they appear incapable of doing. Tim, how are Democrats going to win some rural seats and control the legislature ever?
I think they'd have to adopt some issues and some policy initiatives that are consistent with what people want in those counties, and they haven't.
I mean, the Democrats, they're an urban party, and I think that's what really hurts them in a state like Montana, and that's why you have very strong Republican control of the legislature.
But on election night, in that nonpartisan Supreme Court race, Dirk Sandifer won handedly, and he won a lot of these rural counties. So how
supported by Democrats, too.
So what is the secret sauce for Dirk Sandifer in that race, and what can the Democrats learn from that race? And Tim, you had some involvement in that race.
Yeah, I worked with Julie Masek and some other people on that campaign. And I think, first of all, Dirk Sandifer is a fantastic judge. He's a fantastic person, and he is a very honest, straightforward, good communicator. And it's a great place to start. The campaign itself was focused on all of Montana, not just a few Montanans, which is sometimes a strategy in Montana. You can say, well, let's pick and choose a few Montanans. We instead chose to go after as many people as possible in a nonpartisan race and run right up the middle and help people understand who Dirk was, get him to know his name because he had never run statewide before, and then eventually understand his values and where he's coming from. And where he's coming from is the Constitution and calling balls and strikes on that. He didn't take policy positions. He didn't make extreme arguments on the left or the right because he's not that kind of guy.
In 2014, we had that really divisive Van Dyke wheat race, and it was seen as an opportunity back then for a more conservative voice to be put in the court. And it looked like a lot of folks were salivating, at this race because it was an open seat. Why didn't Juris win? Why did basically the conservatives fall down against Dirk Sandefur?
Yeah, I mean, the conservatives have been trying to capture seats on the Montana Supreme Court for quite a few cycles now, and we were talking earlier about Cindy Youngkin losing to Nelson. McKinnon is probably the exception to the rule here, beating Sheehy. And of course, Van Dyke, as you mentioned, was kind of a promising candidate in 2014. The business community, the conservatives, really want to get that seat on the court, and they've been putting quite a bit of resources into those races. The business PACs will coalition and put money in. There's some money coming in from out-of-state interests on those races too. I just don't think they've been able to match the money that's coming in from the trial lawyers, the unions, and the environmental groups. They just have not been able to match that money. And then I think from a messaging standpoint, I still think that stream access issue could have been an Achilles heel for Juris.
Isn't it possible, though, that maybe Montanans don't want someone on the court who's just going to be on the side of business interests and corporate interests? Maybe they want someone there who's going to be for individual rights and for things that may be called liberal causes.
Well, hopefully the electorate is making those kind of calculated decisions when they're going to the voting box instead of voting Democrat or voting Republicans. We always kind of it's hard to put a lot of faith in the electorate sometimes, but
I think we can't ignore the fact that Gianforte lost because he wasn't that great of a candidate and didn't run a great campaign. Kristen Juris wasn't a great candidate and didn't run a great campaign. Conservatives were giving money to the Sandefur campaign. Business community people were giving money to the Sandefur campaign. People across the board, were giving money to the Sandefur campaign proactively, and that's why he won on such a dominant statewide basis in rural and urban counties. The fact that he is a great candidate and he was buttressed by what I think was a pretty fantastic campaign really counted Juris out pretty early on.
We've got about a minute left, so let's just real briefly. Steve Bullock just put forward his budget.
Yep.
Is this dead on arrival, Glenn?
I would say yes. You've got rather conservative leadership in both the Senate and the House, and Governor Bullock's budget is predicated on tax increases. In order for him to come out with a balanced budget and with the $300 million in the bank that he wants, he's going to have to raise taxes. And he wants to soak the rich. Of course, he's got the $500,000 and above. He's going to raise the marginal tax rate to 7.9%. The only way he can do that the only way he can pencil out his budget is to raise taxes. And I don't think the Montanans want it, and I definitely don't think the Republican leadership wants it.
Tim, yes or no? Will we get infrastructure?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, we've had a lively discussion about what happened. We're going to have to see what happens in the upcoming legislature. Mike and I are going to take some time. We'll probably be back late December, early January to talk about the legislature and things to come. Thanks for joining us on Face the State.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.